Okay, so we're very, very lucky today because we have the creator of Boulderdash with us. A big welcome to Peter Liepa, who's kindly agreed to join us. Welcome, Peter.
Hi guys, how are you doing?
Really good, really
Yeah,
good.
doing really well. Now, Peter, as the designer of the classic puzzle game Boulderdash, I'd like to say a big thank you and hello from the 8-Bit Crisis team. Um, we do have a lot of questions for you today, but one of the main ones that I thought of was what is the inspiration behind Boulderdash?
Um, that is, I think there were a couple of stages in there. Um, I decided one day I was going to try to write an 8-bit game. I mean, it wouldn't be known as an 8-bit game then. It was just a game for something like the Atari. I've been playing those games with friends for a while and um, more or less had the revelation of I could do that. Let's give it a shot. So um, I started off by buying the Atari, reading some manuals, learning a little about the languages that were available, how to make special effects. Back in those days, you bought magazines from newsstands and they'd be 300 pages long. I don't know if that might be a slight exaggeration, but they were definitely what would be called door stoppers. And they'd be full of articles on about new products and demonstration code that you could type in and learn the ropes with. Um, my second step was rather than having an inspiration at hand, I thought, okay, I could pretty well write any genre. Let's go find a publisher um, and ask them, well, what kind of demand are you seeing? What kind of game are you looking for? I did that. There was a local publisher named In-Home Software. They said, well, we don't know either, but we do have a prototype written by um, somebody else in the area that they don't have the skills to productize, but we kind of like the idea. If you've ever read a little about the background of Boulder Dash, you'll know that this was a program in BASIC written by a young fellow named Chris Gray, who I'm sure had worked very hard to do this, but it was um, really just a starter thing. It was also a very close clone of a game that I believe was developed in Britain called The Pit, and he called his version Pitfall. Um, I was kind of vaguely aware that it was a clone, but thought, okay, why not? It looks like In-Home wants a conversion of this. I should be able to do this fairly quickly, convert it to machine language, which was the standard, I think, for publishing game software back in the day. We are talking the early 1980s here. Um, and so that's what I set off to do. Unfortunately, I wasn't, after I'd spent more than an hour looking at Chris's game, I was sort of a little underwhelmed by the gameplay and the concept and the fact that it was a copy of something else. I decided to strip the thing or go back to scratch and just write a little demo with demo physics that showed how things like boulders and dirt and a player and some spaces could interact. And so more or less came up with the original Boulder Dash physics engine, which in those days was just circles for boulders, squares for dirt, and spaces for space, and a random number generator that would just throw up random arrangements of these on the screen. And there would also be a player figure, which was probably a plus sign or something. And I would control this with a joystick and just sort of play with the physics and found that I really enjoyed it. It was absolutely addicting. You could have all sorts of scenario. I mean, just playing it, you could see all the potential for the game that was really not in that demo or anything related to what the original game, The Pit, would have done. Um, so yeah, after a few days, I could create avalanches. I could create all kinds of little mazes where I would trap myself or try to escape from collections of rocks. And things more or less went from there. The next step, once I had the basic physics worked out, was, well, let's figure out a motivation for the player. You know, does the player have to get from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen? You know, finding his way through a jumble of rocks. Uh, how could I make that more interesting? And that's probably where the idea of jewels came from.
Mm.
I also found that creating avalanches out of, concentrating rocks all together, boulders all together, and creating avalanches was also a lot of fun. But, how could I make the player do that sort of thing? So the whole idea was to put, I guess, things like enemies and jewels and whatever and exits as ways of motivating the player, not only to solve a puzzle, but actually to have some fun situations like big avalanches or escaping, fighting your way through little minefields of rocks and not crushing yourself, this sort of thing. So the thing just sort of grew from there. It just was fun to play, even from day one, and then it was a matter of embellishing everything over and over again to motivate the player, and at the same time give the player a lot of fun and, even, shall we say, psychological inducements. Everything from chasing to smashing to avoiding enemies, running from enemies to cleaning, mowing the lawn. If you've ever mowed a lawn, you've probably experienced even a bit of a slight satisfaction in taming the mess and cleaning up. So there are all these kind of psychological little forces that I discovered I could, shall we say, elicit or motivate by setting up game situations.
Fantastic. And I think that paints a picture really nicely of how you developed just a simple physics idea into a game that actually has a bit of a story and meaning to it. I think that's really good for Luigi to get some sort of perspective on how that idea develops into a game from something quite simple to start with. One of the things I want to pick up on there is when you mentioned about machine language, we have just started to look at assembly language and machine language. Um, how different is it on the equipment that you were using to actually get to that level? Because initially people just learn basic, right? And then you at some point you go, if I want to make my games more efficient and get better at this process, you need to start delving into roots into the machine, into machine language. So how did that work for you?
Yeah, machine language was a necessity and a standard in the day just because I think, games were sold, I believe, on cartridges, and cartridges were fairly small. So even, the Atari itself would have had 64K of memory, which I don't think anybody these days can really comprehend. I don't have a good, I'm sure maybe if you are teaching yourself to program retro machines, you have some idea. But
Yeah.
in those days, memory is expensive and scarce, and uh, people wouldn't have bought machines if they had tons and tons of memory. So everything had to be squeezed in. And the same thing with speed. Even though these days computer process or uh, CPUs, their speed is probably mentioned or measured in terms of nanoseconds or sorry, I've been kind of out of the business for a while, but then it was kind of more like hundreds or thousands of instructions in a second as
That's
opposed to
right. Yeah, I think we've gone from
billions.
megahertz up to multiple gigahertz. So, thousands of times faster in terms
Right.
of cycle speeds. But
So in those days it was kind of a necessity. both because of space requirements and speed requirements. And but if you had studied computer science in those days, it was not a particularly big deal. Those were the days where most computer languages were barely a step above machine language. Um, and in fact, on the other hand, machine language, you really have to break your little logic into very small pieces. I did find out in my research that there was a stack-based language called Forth that used even less space, and so I used that as my original or my first development language, with the goal of converting at the end, once I had a more or less finished product, converting it into machine language.
Oh, I see. So you can almost use Forth as a stepping stone through assembly. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
That's the way it worked out because
Yeah.
again, I could build fairly complex, you know, logic quite efficiently in Forth. Um,
Really interesting. The only place I've ever heard of Forth before is in relation to some of the space shuttle thing. So I think they did some of the software for NASA spacecraft in Forth, and that's the only time I've ever come across it before. But
yeah, this I don't know very much. I mean, I think probably people would have heard of it more back then, although I don't
mm,
know that even then it was that popular. It turns out we we have kind of re-archived the original floppy disks that I developed on. So they've been converted to electronic form where they can be run in emulators. And turns out that I'm currently working with um, a Polish, I guess, hobbyist slash investigator in this or enthusiast who has been researching the use of Forth back in the day, back in the 80s for things like the Atari.
mm.
So we've actually been working together looking at the old discs, which, to me are just complete, they're hieroglyphics. I barely recognize anything, but he can look at it and sort of explain explain what it was that I did. So we are in the midst of a very exciting little collaboration right now, kind of reanimating this very old stuff.
And I think that's great. That's very similar to what I'm doing at the moment, really going back to my youth, but more as an end user rather than a developer. And I know
Mhm.
we're due to speak to a guy called Nick Pelling. I don't know if you've heard of Nick before. He's a Brit.
Yeah.
He designed the Frack video game for the Acorn BBC Micro. And he actually spent some time during COVID recreating his game. It looks very similar in terms of the graphics and everything, but recreating it, and he put it on Steam. Basically said this is how I kind of initially imagined the game to be, but due to various limitations, it didn't quite work out like this. So he kind of went back and did it all again, which is
Right.
kind of cool, I think. I think you have
Yeah, well, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I've done the sort of same thing as because these old development materials were not really yet looked at, or I mean, I hadn't figured out how to use them. I've actually written little modern versions of Boulderdash using JavaScript and HTML. Same deal, and it's not particularly hard to do, especially, with modern languages.
Well, it seems like it's going to be quite a while before I can create games up to your standard. But the thing I'd quite like to ask you is, do you really meet many people my age, or is it mainly just people from Link's era recreating their youth?
Sorry, recreating what?
Their
Or
youth.
reliving the
oh, recreating
past.
their youth.
Reliving.
Oh,
Yeah,
sort of doing this nostalgia thing.
yeah.
Um, well, it's an interesting question. Generally, I think, yeah, Link's demographic tends to be the one that is most enthusiastic about this because they kind of grew up with it. Um, but I just met a 27-year-old woman in the gym like 1 or 2 days ago who's very interested in 8-bit music. And I mentioned I wrote a game from the day, and she said, "Oh, yeah, please." And there had been, I guess, contemporary arrangements of the theme music of Boulder Dash. One in light metal that I got from a guy in Poland, and another reggae version. So yeah, sent them to her on WhatsApp, and she was quite excited. So um, I do suspect though, Luigi, you are 12, something like that,
13.
13.
You don't forget. Yeah.
I generally have no idea. It sounds to me like you guys are trying to bring up some awareness and maybe excitement in your generation with this podcast. So,
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, it's a bit of a niche within a niche, but why not? If people want to tune in and learn more about it, then there'll be something up there that's a bit accessible, and they can have a look at it. Um, I was pondering this question because I know it was a fairly brief foray into video gaming for you, wasn't it? And then you went on to have a sort of further career in various computer related activities. Over the years, have you carried any concepts or thoughts with you and kind of had an idea and thought, I wonder if this game will ever be made that you never got round to making, perhaps?
I'm going to say not really. I did have another grid-based game in mind back then, but life kind of went the other direction. And besides, I don't know that it had a lot of potential. It wasn't exactly Candy Crush or something.
Mhm.
Um, so it's not like the world has lost something else. Um, I have written a couple of other games just as personal little projects to learn a language or a technology, but that was just a throwaway sort of thing. Um, I do think, Boulderdash is in some sense a one hit wonder. I think a bunch of things had to come together. Um, as much as I take pretty well full credit for the game and the physics and all that, it would never have happened had Chris not written this little clone and had the publishers not passed it on and this sort of thing. So, I often think life is like a marble maze. I don't know if you know the reference here, but you tilt a maze with a marble in it, and you try to evade all the holes and get to the end. And so many of our endeavors, even though we may have great aspirations or inspirations at the beginning, they basically fall off the road eventually. So it takes a lot of luck and perseverance, and I guess a lack of other distractions or
Mhm.
better things to do to actually carry these things forward to fruition.
Absolutely. And if there's other opportunities in front of you, then of course you take them. But one hit wonder, I'm not sure I'd agree with that because it's spawned many sequels. It's become quite a franchise in and of itself. I understand that there's a 40th anniversary production is it in development? Is it ready to be released? It's following on 10 years later from a 30th anniversary game as well. So we're really, really looking forward to the new one.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's, there've been plenty of bumps in the road, I think, in terms of, yeah, but Boulder Dash, I think it's been fairly satisfying in that it has spawned a lot of both commercial, legitimate versions over the years, following technology as it evolves. Um, and there's an absolutely massive kind of fan slash clone community as well that does, not quite legitimate versions. Um, uh, Currently, the publisher for Boulder Dash is BBG, which is based in Munich, Germany, and they have gone from I can't remember the game engine, but fairly sophisticated modern physics from Boulder Dash 30th that perhaps not all the fans were that excited about. Um, I could take it or leave it. I developed some caves there and more or less just developed them based on the physics I was given. And especially when saw little quirks in the physics engine, I would build caves to exploit those quirks. But from what I can tell, and I have not really been greatly in touch, I think they're kind of going back into a more retro look and also gameplay, but I haven't touched it myself, so I don't know.
Okay,
I guess
something
we
to
can
look
always look
forward
forward and hope,
to.
hope it'll be great. Yeah.
Okay, so to end it off, we've got a few quick fire questions for you.
Mhm.
And the first one that I've got for you is, other than the games that you've made, what would you say is your favorite 8-bit game?
Um, Back in the day that there were a few games that I was playing over and over and over again and really liked playing. And the ones I remember, and I apologize to the authors of anything I left out, but I would say the games that really had me going were Crossfire. Have you heard of it?
I've not heard of that one. What system was that on?
These are all Atari.
Okay.
Choplifter,
Yep, heard of that
I
one.
think I really liked. And there was one called Oil's Well that I really enjoyed. Oh, and Castles of Dr. Creep. So take that as, representative of, I think you've heard of one out of four of those, maybe. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, so to be honest, my background was more with the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum when I was
right,
younger. I had a
right.
friend who had an Amstrad CPC, another friend had an Acorn, but it was an Archimedes sort of 16-bit thing. So Atari, I haven't got any direct experience with, but I'm aware of quite a few, like, Pitfall that you mentioned, River Raid, I think.
Well,
There's
Pitfall was an official Atari game, but the Pit was
mm,
an arcade game, I think.
yes, yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds right. Yeah, yeah. Good. Um, so I've already had an answer to my other question that I had in one of Peter's other answers. So why don't you ask your last one?
So, how long did you have to study before you could make games like Boulder Dash?
Um, that's a hard question because I, I I think the easy answer is in terms of studying the Atari system and the languages and sort of before I could get going, maybe a month or two. Um, but there are probably years of school and becoming proficient at computer programming and maybe all sorts of mathematical concepts that are kind of buried and weaved into the thing. And what's a random number generator? I had to know about random number generators, which I can't even tell you where I found out about those. So, there's a lot of elementary school learning and high school learning and university learning and professional learning, and then a lot of hobbyist things, reading. There was a very famous column in Scientific American called Mathematical Games by Martin Gardner. And this guy is a legend, at least people in my generation and generations up and down for me, but I don't know if you've heard of him. So there's just a lot of stuff that was in the air that coalesced. I mean, I was also trained not only in mathematics, but in science, in music composition. I was interested in being an animator when I was young, like maybe 12 or 13 years old. Um, so all of those, again, because unlike modern game development, where I guess you break down the artistic side and the technical side and the marketing side, you have a team of people, potentially hundreds of people, and motion capture studios and the works more or less. Yeah, I was a one-man band, and I had to learn all of those disciplines. Um, uh, I don't know if you've heard of the concept of talent stack, but in this case, you need to know a bunch of different disciplines. You don't have to be very good in them, but the combination has to add up. Um,
Well, you started the interview with the talk of the revelation that you might be able to do something like this, and I think as someone who was, I think, probably about 8 or 9 years old when I was enjoying your game for the first time, I actually had the same revelation myself. I thought, surely I can create one of these games, and I was reading the Commodore 64 manual, but I never got round to it. And you did. And for that, I'd like to say thank you, because I had a lot of fun with your game when I was younger. It was actually many years after it had been released, but still, it was great fun at the time. So thank you. If our fledgling channel ever grows as we would like it to, then maybe one day we can come and visit you in Toronto, and you can show me how to get past level 6. That's where I'm currently stuck at the moment. But
Thank you for the kind words, Link. I thought the point of this whole podcast, though, was finding out what Luigi thought. So,
yeah, well, of course, and he's already done his review, but why don't you let
Yeah.
us know what you thought?
So I've really, really enjoyed it. I've played it a little bit out of screen. I think I nearly finished level 3. And I just had a really good time with it. It was really fun.
And one of the
great.
things you picked up on was the sound, wasn't it?
Yeah, it sounded like almost, for the time, it sounded almost realistic.
Yeah, I think this was the Commodore 64 version, of course, which we appreciate as a port. But it was the way that with the SID chip on that, it could make the actual sound of the scraping of the dirt sound so effective, and when the boulders crashed down, it sound real. And it had a polytonal theme tune to it. And of course, Luigi before that had been playing games like Jetpack on the Spectrum and Paperboy on the CPC, second of which has no sound at all. So it really stood out in that respect. And you like the graphics as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
So yeah, he had a really good time with it.
Well, again, Luigi, to your question of how long did I have to study to write the game? Again, I had prior experience not only in music but in sound creation or sound synthesis. That was kind of in the era of synthesizers. They were kind of coming into the culture, and so I already knew about waveforms and different algorithms for creating sounds and the whole thing. So yes, I like to think that my sounds were pretty good for the day,
Well, I think
especially bits.
great.
Yeah.
That's great that a 13-year-old can pick up on that, isn't it? That's good.
Yep. Yes. Great discernment there and discrimination. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for giving up your time and being a friend on the channel. We'll be certain to let you know when the episode is published.
Very good. My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.